Hey, welcome everybody to the Badass Band Leader Show. On today's episode, we're going to talk about when it's time to replace a band member. And again, on the Badass Band Leader Show, this is about how to take your band to the next level and beyond. If it's a cover band, if you do all originals, or something in between, this is the show for you. Be sure to subscribe if you like what we're talking about here. Okay, now, for today's topic, I'm going to be talking about a controversial topic. It's about when it's time to replace a band member. And I already know that this is going to be controversial because I've kind of been down this road already. I was part of a Facebook group that had I don't know, like 70,000 members. It was like mainly a cover band thing. I'm not gonna tell you the name of it because frankly I don't think you should join. I left the group because the environment of that group, I was in it just for like a month or so, I don't know, and I found myself going in there and posting stuff and commenting on other people's posts, and it turned out to be like one of the most negative experiences that I've ever had on Facebook. I mean, it was crazy. It's kind of depressing because what I found is, and I'm part of other musicians groups. I have been for years, and I think musicians groups are good on Facebook, usually when they're local or regional, because what I find is that people are a lot more civil towards each other. Because I think it's because the musicians in these groups, a lot of them know each other, like in person, like actually know each other, and so they don't say, they're not like total dicks to each other. But man, what I found in this group was that these people were just like saying shit that was just like really uncool, and it was just something I saw over and over. And since there's so many people in there, it was just like, it's kind of like there were trolls basically. But so anyway, so I posted this, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. How I replaced a band member um, that I felt like was not up to snuff musically, and how it was a really emotional experience for me and everything, and it was a very hard decision to make and everything. And I just kind of told this little story in my post, and man, I just got bombarded. I mean, I had some people that were like, hey, I've been there, man. It's a tough decision. I feel for you. And then there were other guys in there who were just like, who the hell do you think you are? What are you, some kind of rock god? And I mean, it was just like really. So I think this topic on when it's time to replace a band member, I almost felt like the people in that group were like not really band leaders. It wasn't their decision to make, and maybe they had been, it was like maybe they had been replaced in a band before, and it was like an emotional thing. So if that's you and you're watching this, I'm probably going to say some stuff in this post that that you're not going to agree with. So anyway, so let's go to the top 5 times I think it's time to replace a band member. Number one, I believe it's when you have a band member who has a drug or an alcohol problem. Now, you can say what you want about this. I think really the best time with anything, it's I'll probably do a whole other episode on how to find the best band members. But so the best time to not get somebody in your band who has a drug and alcohol problem is basically don't get them in your band in the first place. But a lot of times that's not so easy. Just to give you an example, like, there was back in the '90s when I was in a hard rock kind of like alternative group in Dallas. I was back when I was in my 20s. I just moved from Indiana to Dallas. This is before the internet, right? So I answered an ad in the paper. Somebody was looking for a bass player, and they listed their influences and all that. It sounded kind of cool, so I showed up for this audition. And the musicians were great. I actually kind of was familiar with the drummer, believe it or not, all the way from Indiana to Texas. I knew who this drummer was, and I was like really stoked to be in a band with him. And but the guitar player was a cool guy. He had the look going on, and he was a pretty good player. He wasn't great, but he had a lot of the. He had the look, he had the attitude, he had good stage presence, and he was kind of an outgoing, kind of gregarious guy. And but as time went on, I think you can probably see where this is going. So the band, we were rehearsing like 3 times a week in the sweaty garage. We're writing all these originals, and that's at the time back in the '90s when grunge was hitting big, and bands were getting signed left and right. So we're just like, man, we're gonna make it. We're gonna make it. And so we wrote a whole set worth of original material that we all thought was awesome stuff, and we're out there playing, trying to get shows and doing this stuff, and then we started picking up some fans and gaining some notoriety, and we had a gig one night. Actually, our singer, her husband, we had a female singer. Her husband was actually worked for a record company, obviously, which was great connection. And I think this one night he had arranged it for us to be able to do some sort of like showcase thing. It was like an acoustic showcase deal at some bar, and it was a pretty kind of a big deal for us. So we show up to the gig, and the guitar player guy doesn't show, and this is before cell phones, right? So we're like calling his house. He's not answering the phone. We're calling his friends, trying to figure out where he is. I think our drummer like drove over to where he worked to see if he was there, and I think he actually ended up driving to his house. And I don't know if he answered it anyway, but we figured out later that the guy was basically apparently like took his paycheck on Friday, spent the whole thing on whatever drugs he was using, and just went home and like holed himself up in his apartment and just got high and just like totally blew off the gig. And so, and then we tried to do like this intervention thing, and I mean, I think looking back on it, because like his guitars mysteriously got stolen, and looking back on it, I think he probably hawked his guitars. In fact, the singer's husband actually even bought him another guitar to replace his first one, and I think he sold that one. So I mean, this guy was obviously addicted. And sad story, like 15 years later, I found out that he died. Um, so no surprise there. But so, looking back on that situation, I felt like, we tried so hard to do this, because we thought that he was like, well, he's a core member of the band. We can't lose him. This is so important. And I know this is going to sound heartless, but as I wasn't the band leader back then, but I was writing a lot of the songs, and I was rehearsing 3 times a week and playing on gigs. And I mean, I spent a lot of my time in my life in this band. And looking back on the situation, we ended up replacing him with a guy that was great, that we ended up getting along with great, that turned out to be a really key member for the band. But I just remember at the time when we lost this guy, we were going through all this stuff, or we're trying to do this whole intervention thing and all that. It was like the end of the world if we lost him, if we had to replace him. And what we found out is it really not. Everything turned out okay. So if I know sometimes we feel like we have to be compassionate, and we need to try to help these people, and maybe we do, but we still have we have responsibility to the other band members who don't have those struggles, right? And just this constant thing of dealing with guys that you don't know, are they going to show up for gigs? Are they going to show up for rehearsals? Or what's going on? I mean, to me, it's just not worth it. I think I've got a long career in this thing now, and I'm just looking at it and thinking it's just not worth it. So, all right, so let's move on. So number 2, the controversial one is if their playing is not up to par. And again, this is a situation like if you have somebody in your band where you feel like that their abilities are not up to par, the best time to find that out, of course, is before you ever hire them. Before you make that decision to ask them to be in the band, you got to ask yourself the hard question: do they have the skill level that you feel is going to gel with everybody in the band? Are you going in a direction with the band that's, you're going to need somebody in that chair who's going to be, have the chops. And so just a little story behind this, a few years ago, I made the very tough decision to replace the drummer in our band. And a lot of it was because we were trying to, we were doing all covers when we started 6 years ago. And when we started, I was in another band with the same guy, and this band was just meant to be a side project. And so we started doing things, and this band really took off. And what we found was that as the band started growing, as we started trying to write more originals and stuff, and with our funk, we're an 8-piece funk band. We needed a funk drummer. We needed somebody who could play, funk shuffles and just had a certain finesse. And this guy really, frankly, just didn't have that. He was more of a very basic pocket drummer. And it started actually kind of causing some problems in the band. I was getting pressure from other members of the band who, guys who had been on the road for years, who were used to playing with really high level players, like, man, this guy just doesn't, he's not going to be able to cut it with what we're wanting to do. And, I kind of felt a certain pressure as a band leader, like the other guys were thinking about, hey, man, if this doesn't change, I'm going to have to look to do something else because, I don't think it's going to happen with this guy on the throne. And it was a gut-wrenching decision for me because I used to ride to the gigs with this guy every gig. He and we spent a lot of time together, shared a lot of beers together, and I considered him to be a good friend. And I knew that it was going to crush him, because he was in the band since the beginning. But I went ahead and made that decision. And even my wife, she struggled with it too because she knew, she's like, when you make that call, we're going to lose some friends over this. And it's not going to just be him. It's going to be him and his girlfriend. It's going to be his circle of friends. We even thought about are all these people going to stop coming to the shows? And, you think about all these things. It's usually overblown. But, when I did give him the bad news, he seemed to take it well. He kind of said something to the effect of, I knew this would eventually come. I just didn't necessarily think it would happen now. But I understand, he was cool about it. Later on, I heard he wasn't so cool with it. He felt like I didn't handle it very well. I don't know. And we actually did have an issue. We had some of his friends actually come to our gigs after that and stand in the audience and literally flip us off. It was weird, and it was definitely a negative backlash. Not huge, but yeah, it was, people take this stuff, they take it to heart, they take it serious. But, I think that, and with this, I'm not saying that everybody has to do this. If you are sort of you have to really ask yourself, what are my motivations here? Why am I doing this? That's why it's so important to get the right people in the beginning, because if they have great personalities, but their playing's not, they're not just a monster player, and you really see the band going to be where you need monster players in your band, I would keep looking, because you don't want to make this kind of call later on. But sometimes it happens. But, you do have to ask yourself, are we sort of a weekend warrior cover band that, good enough is good enough type of thing? And that's cool. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But but if you really want to strive forward and you feel like your music is going to suffer, that you're going to kind of like be held back by somebody's lack of being able to play, you might have to make that tough call. And that's just up to you. I'm not saying it's for everybody because it's a tough decision to make. Okay, number 3 would be somebody who has a horrible attitude. Especially somebody who's a negative influence on others in your band. That to me is a cut and dry decision that you just got to let them go. I had a situation when we first started our band. We're an 8-piece funk band. We've got a horn section, 3-piece horn section. And when we first started, we had this sax player that we had hired. I'm going to call her name Carol. It's not her real name. But I just, man, as time went on, I really didn't know this lady. And when we first started, we didn't know any horn players. I called around, asked different people, and we got a few people in our band were strangers to us, and I didn't really know anything about horn players. I figured out they needed charts to be able to play. That was a whole thing, but okay, so we ended up hiring this sax player, and man, as time went on, this is really early phases of our band. Our band took off really quick. We were playing for hundreds of people pretty quickly from our very first gig. We were pretty fortunate, and so we were really popular. We weren't making great money because it's like, but I felt like I paid above scale even from the beginning. But man, I felt like and we had some sound issues, because we were just kind of figuring out. This is long before we ever had in-ear monitors or a nice mixer or anything. So we're like buying equipment, and trying to figure out how to use it and all this. And it was like I felt like nothing that I ever did was ever good enough for this girl, and she just complained and complained. And what I found was it started kind of carrying over into the rest of the horn section, and it kind of got to be like this whole us and them mentality, and and then I found out what kind of it came to heads whenever she got drunk one night after a gig and kind of let me have it in the parking lot. But she was like kind of like half joking. I could tell she was drunk, but I didn't really think of that. I think she was like really saying what was really on her mind, but like trying to position it like, oh, I'm drunk, so I'm going to say something. Don't take me too serious. And then I found out later on, like the following week, she was at another bar. Our drummer happened to show up, and she was totally talking shit about me. Like, like this guy, she literally referred to me as a tyrant. And I couldn't take it anymore, because it really had started creating this really backbiting sort of atmosphere in the band. And so, I had to let her go. So I think if you have anybody in the band where it's like you can't do anything right, they're talking shit about you as a band leader all the time, and that that's happening, you got to let them go, because the fact is you can absolutely, especially if your band is popular and you're playing around and you're making money, you won't have any problem replacing them. In fact, I had when we auditioned at that point to replace her, I mean, I had guys lining up wanting to be in the group, and so I had to, which was great because then I was able to choose who I really felt like was the best player with the best attitude. So don't be held prisoner or whatever to what you think is like, oh, I can't replace this person because what if I can't, you'll be able to replace them. It won't be a big deal. Okay, number 4, again, this is probably not going to give me too much love from the musicians community, but I feel like it's true as a band leader, which is it's time to replace someone if they are constantly subbing out. Meaning, if you have somebody where you don't know whether if you're trying to fill your schedule with gigs, if you're doing all the booking and you're playing every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever, and you never know if that person is going to be available, if they're going to be like, oh, dude, especially if that person is subbing out to playing higher paying gigs, that's an issue with us because, we have an 8-person band. I knew that from the beginning. I mean, you got 8 mouths to feed, plus we have a sound crew, and so we got 10 people. But, it's because we believe in what we're doing. We have a big sound, and we're popular for that reason, I think. And, so we're not maybe able to pay, what other gigs would pay. But we've got a long-term strategy. And we stay pretty busy. I mean, my guys do pretty well on a year-by-year basis. But, I've had situations where I hired this one sax player who was just a smoking hot sax player. But, I mean, it got to be, I felt like he joined the band because, he was kind of in a little bit of a lull with getting gigs. And then when kind of word got out that he was such a smoking hot player, he started getting all sorts of gigs. And the thing with sax players is that they can sit in with just about anybody. They're like they can go play wedding gigs. They don't really even need to know the book. They can just show up and they just start playing, and and make pretty good money. And so it didn't take long before this guy was just like, sorry, man, I'm not available that night. Oh, sorry, man, I'm not available. And it was like, it was just this juggling act to try to figure out when he was playing and making sure that I was going to show up to a gig and there was going to be a sax player there. So, and he and I, it was cool. We're still friends. I was just like, look, man, I don't think this is going to work out. I just, it's so hard to keep up with all these subs, right? And, and I actually had that. This kind of leads to my next point, which is the number 5, which I think is the other person that you need to look at replacing, which is the diva. And that diva can be either a woman, it can be a man, and I think when I say diva, if you have one that immediately springs to mind, you probably have one in your band. But now, if somebody's, so what's a diva? A diva in my mind is somebody who's, kind of like, feel like they're above other people in the band. You know, it's like, or they don't want to participate in, like, they don't, like, they're really, really good. You know, maybe they're a phenomenal singer or a phenomenal guitarist, and they've got some notoriety in the area. So like, oh, and, you know, so and so is in that band. They're really awesome, and they sort of like feel like you've got fans who are coming there just to see that particular person, and that person knows it. You know, they're like, you know, I have my following, and you know, they feel like they're kind of doing you a favor by being in your band, and it carries over into they don't show up for rehearsals or they don't show up prepared for gigs, you know, and they just got sort of a bad overall attitude. But again, it's hard to describe exactly what a diva is, but I've experienced it. We had an issue with that in our early days. A certain vocalist that, you know, just that was what was going on. You know, it was like we felt, you know, she was a phenomenal singer and had a lot of notoriety in the area. But what people didn't see was the lot of the stuff that was going on in the background with the rest of the band. You know, the band started, you know, we had 7 other people in the band that were just like really sort of starting to resent this person because of the way because of her behavior. And you know, and plus a lot of times she would show up to the gigs and she would not be on. She'd be like, she was real emotional, so like she'd show up to these gigs and you know, barely even perform. You know, she'd wear like sunglasses, and it would just sort of like, you could tell that she was just like really just not into it. And, you know, she was like totally distracted by something that went on before the gig, you know, and, you know, and it kind of came to heads. I mean, and then kind of going to my further point, then she decided she was going to join another band, um, doing a completely different style of music. And that band was staying super busy. And you know, then she started subbing out all the time with some other singer that frankly was nowhere near as good as she was. And I had this weird issue that started cropping up where people were started asking me, is that you know, the first singer, the diva girl, is she going to be there? You know, otherwise we're not going to show up if she's not going to be there. And I thought, man, this is getting out of hand. I never formed this band to be the backup group for this particular singer, you know, and it was unfair to the other people in the band. It was unfair to me. So, so I had to let her go. So I think if you have a diva in your band, somebody who, especially if it's causing a lot of problems in the band, if you have somebody who's just really fantastic and they're cool, you know, and they're like a totally into the band and cool about it, you know, but they're, you know, that they're maybe a sort of a diva, you know, that's fine. But for us, it was just causing a lot of problems and a lot of drama. And drama, you got to cut it out because it, you know, it can, it's negatively impacting you. It's negatively impacting the other members of the band. And your job, I feel, as a band leader, is to constantly monitor that. And you know, because it's hard keeping bands together and keeping everybody. You know, you're not going to keep everybody happy. You know, but a happy band, the one that's cohesive, that works together well, man. I mean, there's just no substitute for that. So, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Again, if you like what I'm laying down, please subscribe to our channel, subscribe to the podcast, and we will see you next time.